their statement. Well, Russ Baker, an investigative journalist and editor of WhoWhatWhy.com, now joins me from New York via broadband for some analysis. Mr. Baker, President Karzai declared recently that he will put strict controls on how U.S. troops conduct themselves in the country. However, now another strike causing many civilian deaths. Could this bring the alliance in direct conflict with the Afghan government? And how do you think the situation will play out?
There's certainly a growing problem afoot, and I think we need to distinguish between the bombings by the drones and those by manned aircraft. The incident that early Wednesday morning involved manned aircraft. Western forces working with Afghan forces were attacking a house where they believed that Taliban commanders were meeting, and when they encountered resistance, gunfire, they called in airstrikes. Now, the obvious danger of that is that you can have imprecise information, and of course in those areas there are people living there. There are women and children and non-combatants, and so of course it's extremely dangerous. We'll have to wait to see what happened in this situation, but we've had quite a few. Last week there was another bombing where a large number of civilians are said to have been killed, and another 2 weeks before, the U.S. ambassador was called in by the Afghan leaders and brought on the carpet about this. It's a huge problem, of course, because it's entirely disproportionate when you receive a small amount of arms fire to send in airstrikes, and I think there's going to have to be much more of a discussion about how proper this is, and also the consequences of alienating Afghans even more and provoking more suicide bombings.
And it seems like it would be for a lot of Afghan people that what it comes down to is people are dying. We've seen an increased number of protests against NATO forces in the country. Could these attacks give the Taliban an opportunity to recruit more and more people? I mean, that's what critics are saying is going to happen.
Yes, I mean, the Taliban is very effective at recruiting, and today we just saw another attack, which should be mentioned. That this was by the Taliban, suicide attacks near Kandahar, where trucks with civilians were queuing up, waiting to move supplies into the NATO base there, and one suicide bomber went in and killed a lot of people, all civilians, and then we saw more civilians came to try to rescue them. Another bomber then unleashed his bomb. So it's an enormous problem, this tit for tat, this back and forth. Clearly, it's not getting any better. It's probably going to get a lot worse. And if anybody thinks they're winning the hearts and minds of that country, either the Taliban or the West, I think they are sadly mistaken.
Yeah, 22 civilians killed in that terror act that you were just talking about. I want to touch on Pakistan. They have also demanded that NATO stops drone strikes on its territory. What's the real impact NATO's having in the region as a whole?
Well, again, it's very, very complicated, and in Pakistan, much more murky. The Pakistani government has said, and more so increasingly, that they would like to be running that program themselves. I don't know that they're entirely against drone strikes, but they would like to be handling them. They see right away the issue of foreign powers being able to order those strikes without necessarily coordination or permission from the Pakistani government as threatening their sovereignty. So I think that's an issue with the military itself, but again, alienating people, killing civilians, particularly in the border regions, and it's just difficult to see how this benefits anybody, how this advances world peace, how this really significantly sets back the Taliban. I think an entirely different solution is going to have to be conceived of, and it does not involve bombs.
Yeah, and NATO also being blamed, or people putting in other words, as breaking international law with actions in that region there. And then we see the coalition pushing quite strongly for military intervention in Syria. Can the alliance continue to toot itself as an advocate for world democracy here? How long can this go on?
The Syrian situation fascinates me. On WhoWhatWhy.com, we've been writing about it, taking a look at what seems to be a fair amount of murky reporting and I would say even some disinformation. It reminds us a lot of Libya, where we are getting very much a one-sided account of a government that is clamping down without any indication at all of the tremendous amount of involvement of foreign powers in supplying the opposition. And that kind of reporting strikes us as reckless because we are seeing these kind of mop-up operations in one country after another. Certainly, the West is going to be able to prevail, I think, much more easily over the long term in Syria as they did in Libya, and much less in a country like Afghanistan, which has never taken kindly to foreign invaders, whether they were Russians or Americans or anybody else.
All right, Russ Baker, live from New York via broadband, editor of WhoWhatWhy.com. Very interesting comments about the situation in Afghanistan and the Mideast in general. Thanks for that.
Thank you.